Welcome. It is Thursday. It is a late night BITCH session. I spelled that because for some strange reason recently all my videos become demonetized. Whatever. I do reviews and almost every single time it comes back as monetizable. But hey, you know, every nickel counts. So hopefully you guys can hear me and see me. This might be a very long stream. I have a feeling. I don't know. I just got a lot to complain about, I guess, tonight. When it comes to atheist. So it's going to be one of those streams. So when I'm going to say that I won't be very long, I'll probably be lying, and so I'm not going to try. Anyways, welcome, Cheshire, Jack, Hackskull. I got some other people who might be joining later on as far as the live chat. I asked one person from a group that has just been spewing absolutely not. Oh, today no, it's Friday in your time. Yeah, you're in the future, Rez. For us people in the past, today is Thursday, right? I mean, so... Don't make me double check this stuff because I got stuff to do tomorrow on Friday. So hope I didn't miss a day. But like I said, I'm not even going to try to attempt this. It's going to be a short stream. I mean, who knows? It might be. I did ask on Twitter what time you guys like having streams, and I had asked whether you prefer them with respect to Pacific time, morning, afternoon, evening, or late night. And pretty much overwhelmingly, it was evening time Pacific, and 4:30 to me is about an evening. I usually wait till about 5, but yeah, I'm working on the lighting. Actually, what I'm going to be doing, I think, Cheshire, is I'm going to be moving my desk and my chair into the kitchen over here because the lighting is more natural. And I put the green screen on the wall there, and it should be this nice, even lighting, because right now the lighting is uneven. I did push it a little bit further back, and I do have my ring light and I have my drop light here, but it's just, it doesn't work too well because it's not natural lighting. Now during the day it's perfect in here because it's all natural lighting and it's all scattered, so there's a nice evenness on the green screen rather than the shadows, because that's kind of what you're seeing. This is the unevenness of the green screen, the shadows, and then the translucency of it trying to pick that up. So I don't know how we got involved in that, but that's okay. So if you guys notice, I did change my thumbnail just a few minutes before I went on air. I'll be talking about both things, but I thought the thumbnail that I used really encapsulate what this is about, because I am sick of this. I am so sick of this. I don't even have words to describe. Look, I'm the first person to admit there are some crappy theists out there. I mean, I have been against young Earth creationism since time began. I think that those low-level fundamentalists, the people that advocate harm to others because of their religious beliefs, I have no use for any of them. I will stand by every atheist on the planet against that kind of religion, against that kind of fundamentalism, against that kind of rejection of secularism. But at the same time, by doing so, I have to make sure that the atheists that I'm standing with have some sense of rationality. I mean, sure, in the bigger picture, I will still stand by them as far as I think religious threats are a bigger threat, as far as, people wanting to kill people over religion, or people wanting to throw people off buildings because of their sexuality. Those are bigger threats. Not even going to try to pretend otherwise, okay? But I mean, the degree of irrationalism that I've seen out of Atheist Echo Chambers is beyond my comprehension. I didn't put in the video description, I apologize, but I will after it uploads. But if you guys really want to check it out, go check out Charlie Dave and Joe over in Answers and Reason. They broke down a video that I'm going to be talking about a little bit. I'm not going to be reviewing the video because it's not worth it. They did a brilliant job. They hit all the high points. There's no reason for me to go through the video. But I will be talking about it. But all three of them on Answers and Reasons today are atheists. And I mean, they do just believe that there are no gods. All gods don't exist. And they're philosophy people. They're philosophically oriented. And they reviewed a video of a gentleman who just had no understanding of philosophy. And it was very basal, the way he approached trying to argue against a well-known atheist, Speed Watkins, also known as the Anthology Project, who is a PhD student. He knows his stuff. But anyways, I did a little survey, and I thought the results were interesting. Now, my votes are obviously very, very general in nature. I do that for a reason. They're not supposed to be any kind of real scientific data. It's a Twitter thing, so... Excuse me, I still got my allergies off. I apologize. I'll try to mute. It's not the coof, okay? I actually got a HEPA filter here, and the HEPA filter has been working 3 days now to purify everything. Has helped. But I still got this dry cough coming back to the desert, and it is allergy. So I do apologize, but I'll be trying to mute on that. Okay, so this particular vote was 225 votes, which is pretty decent for my Twitter. Who likes your echo chambers more, atheist or theist? And I'm actually surprised by this result. I really thought it would be more theist, but I think people are recognizing that atheists in their echo chambers will boot anybody who disagrees with them with objective evidence. I have been removed from so many atheist groups on Facebook, I have no idea. I couldn't count. And every one of them I've given objective evidence. I've been accused of committing fallacies like appeal to authority just by merely giving citations saying this is how it's normative in philosophy, this is my position, supports my position. Oh, that's appeal to authority. Well, it's a non-fallacious use of appeal to authority, and if you don't understand it's non-fallacious, then you don't understand fallacies. You could buttress your argument by citing experts. Scientists do this all the time in research papers. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's not a fallacious use of argumentum ad vericundiam. It is a very legit form of argumentation, I'm saying that I believe this to be the case. This is my argument, and these people happen to agree with me. And here's some arguments for that. Now, that doesn't mean that my argument is necessarily right because the arguments, the expert agrees. That is fallacious, right? You can't say I'm right because such and such expert says so. That would be completely fallacious. But just by throwing out a fallacy does not negate the argument. And I find that these echo chambers, all they do is just throw out these fallacies, and 9 times out of 10 they get them wrong. I mean, Charlie Dave's seen it before many times. Atheists just say, oh, that's this fallacy, and you're like, no, it's not. But they're so used to doing it to theists, who do a lot of times have these fallacies, that they think it's an automatic defeater for anything you have to say, even if you have objective evidence that shows what you're talking about is probably a good argument, or at least the logic is valid. And so, there's this one group that we'll get into, on Facebook, that I've known the guy for forever. Rational Response Squad, Bind Sapient. But he told me this group is for people who identify as atheist. Doesn't matter you believe gods exist, doesn't matter you don't believe gods exist. It's who identifies. So he's now made his group about identification. It's identity politics at that point. It's not a matter of, oh, Steve doesn't identify as an atheist, but he doesn't believe there's gods. Let's incorporate him and work together. It is, oh, Steve doesn't identify as an atheist. Therefore, he's an outsider. Therefore, he is a heretic. Therefore, he is not welcome in the Atheist Echo Chamber. I'm not even making this up. I never do. I mean, everything I tell you is straight out of something that actually happened. And it's kind of funny when I post something on Facebook. I actually have people messaging me. Say, hey, Steve, where this happened? I'm like, oh, it happened on Facebook. Can you link me? Sure. And they go in there and go like, oh, crap, this really is what happened. I'm like, I try to tell people when I post something on Twitter as a quote, it literally does happen. Now, if it's a private group, I don't tell who it is because it's a private group. But if it's a public group, then sometimes I'll screenshot it, like I have one here. But seriously, I have been kicked out of atheist groups for speaking the truth. If that's not an echo chamber, please someone tell me what is. Someone tell me what an echo chamber is if I'm getting kicked out of atheist groups for telling the truth. Because I don't identify as an atheist. Because I'm not an atheist. But, so this vote here is, 53%, 58%, I'm sorry, 58% to 51.8%. That's pretty remarkable. That's almost 50-50. I mean, it's 60, about 60-40, right? That, it's toward theists, but there's a lot of people that recognize that atheists like their echo chambers. And it's to me, when you have an echo chamber, you're basically saying by fiat, nobody's allowed to even question the underlying foundations of the group, right? There's something called the fallacy of the taboo. It's the antithesis of the a priori argument. And so the a priori argument is basically saying, hey, look, this is just true because of some kind of dogmatic by fiat assertion, right? We'll see that a lot of time with creationists. They'll just say, look, in fact, just on the non sequitur show the other day, we ran into this fallacy. It was actually saying in a textbook, which was not a textbook, but a homeschool book from Advanced Christian Education. They were saying that, what's the definition of evolution? Well, evolution is a false theory, blah, blah, blah. That's an a priori argument. That's a fallacy. That's literally saying before you even get out of the gate that something's wrong or something's false without even arguing why it's false. And then the fallacy of the taboo is basically saying these are taboo topics that you cannot talk about. You cannot. Like, for example, I think that atheists do the fallacy of the taboo when they, by fiat, say intelligent design. It's not a real argument. I'm not an intelligent design advocate, not by any stretch of imagination, right? But I think that it's worthy of at least having discourse on it, right? I mean, they do make some interesting arguments, teleological arguments that need to be addressed. They can't just be hand waved away. Do I think they are assailable? Yes. But also, I don't subscribe to intelligent design. But they're not like creationist arguments that I think you can just, at this point, hand wave away. When somebody says, hey, carbon dating doesn't work, the first thing you need to say is, okay, well, show us it doesn't work. I mean, at that point, in the scientific domain, when people are saying things like carbon dating doesn't work, the onus has already been established that it does work. You have nothing else to show as far as the onus to demonstrate that. All that work has been done. You do have a burden of proof for your belief. If I say, look, I believe radiometric dating works, I have a burden of proof to myself, an epistemic burden of proof of why I believe that. Well, I believe that because I understand the physics behind it, right? I do understand a little bit about the decay and physics and why it is what it is. So I'm justified to hold that belief that radiometric decay is the case. Now, you can go simple. You can just say, look, I'm justified to believe that radiometric decay works because the experts say so. Okay, that is an appeal to authority, and you might be able to justify it that way. Okay, I get that. We do that all the time. If I say, look, my doctor says I have cancer, I'm justified to believe I have cancer, even though I don't have to know anything about cancer. Right? I didn't go to med school. I'm relying upon the expert, who's somebody who does understand cancer, who we've given the ability to make those diagnoses, to trust their judgment that I have cancer if that's the diagnosis. Doesn't mean I may not want a second opinion, right? So just because we rely on experts is not always fallacious, right? Even an atheist, how many atheists go, well, doctor, do you have a citation for that evidence? Can I see the results, the lab results? And there's nothing wrong with that. But how many experts? I mean, how many people know how to read lab results, right? If you don't have a medical background, what good is reading the results? Now, that's some empirical data, because that empirical data could be wrong. Yes, there always is false positives or false negatives on tests. So it's not conclusive. It doesn't, quote, prove you have cancer. It's just more likely the case. So I thought it was pretty remarkable that there's 42% that thought that atheists have echo chambers. And I think a lot of them have experienced this. A lot of people that are out there promoting naturalism, promoting atheism, are accused of being theists. This would happen in the video that I commented on the other day that Joe and Charlie did a review on. The atheist is a well-known atheist, and he was being accused of being a Christian plant because the guy didn't understand his arguments. And I thought that was ridiculous. But, like I said, these atheist groups out there, they won't even allow me any longer to even put my arguments forward, even though they haven't assailed them. They haven't shown them wrong. It's, oh, well, Steve can't be in this group because he doesn't identify as an atheist. I mean, if that's not identity politics, I don't even know what would be. I really don't. But, do you guys think that's interesting that 42% almost thought atheists have, they like their echo chambers? And by the way, I'm not disagreeing with it. I think this is a pretty good representative sample size. Now, even in theist groups, I see atheists going there all the time. And they get, they get more respect than I think atheists who go into atheist groups saying, hey, look, you guys are putting out misinformation. You guys have your logic wrong. And I'll show a couple cases here of the logic not being correct, but it doesn't matter because they identify as an atheist. Identifying as an atheist is more important than getting the logic right, according to certain atheists. How is that rational? How is that a rational position to take? As long as you identify as atheist, it doesn't matter if the logic is correct or not. I find that to be completely irrational. Matter of fact, the video that Charlie Dave was reviewing with Joe, the guy, his name was a Bitchspot or whatever, something blog smart, I don't know, something, but Bitchspot blog or something. But he was strict empiricism. Mark Pellegrino's kind of the same way. For some reason, they go to strict empiricism. Strict empiricism is not viable. It is self-refuting. You have to have a mixture of rationalism with empiricism to have a solid foundational epistemological base. At least, I mean, that's my position. Other philosophy people might disagree with that, and that's fine. But they need to explain why. I don't think that this guy, blog, bitch, whatever, he can explain why. But rationalism is an approach to argumentation and understanding and acquiring knowledge by logic and reasonable inferences, right? If I have an inductive argument, that's a reasonable inference. I can make a conclusion that I think is more problematically true. And that's perfectly fine. That's how we acquire new information, is through inductive reasoning. You know, if I get out of the bed every morning and I, by intuition, induction, think that there's going to be a floor to put my feet on, I can get out of bed. If I can't, I can't get out of bed. I mean, I'm literally paralyzed. I'm like, what am I going to do? There's no floor. I have to make that assumption. That's rationalism. So empiricism would be the approach for empirical things, where you can test it, you can evaluate, you can quantize, you can do experiments with. It's basically observational. So empiricism is things that we observe. But things are not always what we observe. We have knowledge that's non-experiential. We have a priori. Again, there is debate in this particular topic, but I believe a priori knowledge exists. A priori knowledge doesn't need to be observed. Can it be? Yes. Some of it can. I mean, we can observe that something is in itself, right? So we can observe the law of identity. But we don't have to observe the law of identity in order to know about the law of identity. We can discover it a priori, just through simple mathematics. A equals A. So I think that it's kind of odd that there are groups out there that just hate the fact that I don't identify as atheist, even though, you know, on many other issues, I would in fact agree with them. Secularism, absolutely. Radical fundamentalism, absolutely. Young creationism, absolutely. But to them, it's identity politics. And I've been saying this for so how long? It's one of us, one of us. If you don't agree with them, you're not one of us. You are a heretic. And more and more people are experiencing this firsthand because they are atheist in the truest sense of atheism, of atheology. They believe there are no gods. And there are some great reasons to believe there are no gods. People think that I'm against atheism. They don't know me at all. I think there's some really good reasons for atheism. And they're like, well, why is that? What would be an atheist argument? There's no. I've literally had people, I'm not even joking, people tell me there's no such thing as an atheist argument. What? I mean, sure there is. There's a logical problem, evil. Which, you know, I think it was probably Dave or somebody had mentioned Dave Lewis, who is a expert in modal anti-realism, that basically thinks that logical problem evil is a very, very strong problem for theists. And it is. It is a very strong problem. Now, is there ways of getting around it by lowering the conditions for the omni properties? Yes. But as stated, given the benevolence and the omniscience and the omnipotency, that God, to me, does not exist. That particular God in the logical problem of evil does not exist. I'm not agnostic on that particular God. The reason being is that that particular God is logically incoherent. That means that all the premises in the logical argument cannot be true at the same time, which means that it is seriously an incoherent logical system. If it's an incoherent logical system, I personally believe that you cannot have an incoherent God. Okay, now, if somebody wants to argue that you can have a God that's logically incoherent, a God that can make square circles, okay. I have never seen a theist do that, but whatever. But I would tell that theist, that particular God, I believe that does not exist. And they would say, well, why do you believe it doesn't exist? I'm like, because it violates axioms of logic, and it violates axioms of reason. It just, if you're going to tell me a square circle exists, I'm going to have to say that you're not talking about possible worlds. Because a square circle cannot exist in any possible world. Why? Because it's a logical contradiction. Now, somebody could argue, well, it exists in an impossible world. Okay, yeah, sure, whatever. But I don't deal with impossible worlds. I don't even read about impossible worlds because I don't understand the counterfactuals that well to get into impossible worlds. But possible world theory, something has to be possible. And a square circle, we know is not possible. If a theist tells me a square circle is possible, I'm going to think they're irrational, and of course, I'm going to ask for an explanation, a demonstration, a proof, right? But when people say there's no arguments for atheism, I'm like, Good grief, what is wrong with you? I think the evidential problem of evil is a good argument for atheism. Is it as strict as illogical? No, but it's sure more wide net. If you're going to make an argument from a Bayesian point of view about the probability of gods, and you say, look, here's the logical problem of evil, the evidential problem of evil, the problem of divine hiddenness, and the problem from silence, and all these other logical arguments and arguments against God, then the likelihood of a God existing is very, very low. And as Bertrand Russell said on propositions, what they are and how they mean, he points out that their only things are, one, positive propositions, and two, I think that's in his paper he started talking about bare possibilities, but somewhere Russell talks about bare possibilities, which are just bare possibilities. They are possible. They exist in one possible world at least, but they're not going to be something we're generally going to find in this actualized world. It is a bare possibility that flying pigs can fly out of my ass and spit silver dollars and fart rainbows. That is a bare possibility. Now, is it nomologically possible? No. Is it biologically possible? No. But we're not talking about those possibilities. We're talking about logical possibilities. It is completely logically possible. People say, well, that's not logical. They're not talking about logic in the same way. Logic in the way I'm using it literally means classical or propositional logic, whether it be prepositional logic or it would be modal logic or sentential logic. It doesn't matter. I'm talking about in the logical sense. There's nothing illogical about saying pigs can fly out of my ass. So in some possible world, that is true. Now, when you can have square circles Minecraft. I have a guy that worked on Minecraft to get some of the bugs out. He's gonna be coming on in March. But anyway, so excuse me. Again, I think there's some very good arguments for atheism, and so when people tell me there are no arguments for atheism, I just have to laugh at that, because they're not wanting atheism to be propositional. They want atheism to be psychological. Because if atheism is propositional, atheism can be true or false. And I say I reserve judgment on whether atheism or theism is true or false. I'm an agnostic. Now, I'm more leaning toward God doesn't exist nowadays than it does, but, it vacillates. There's different reasons for different things. But, if an atheist says, hey, Steve, God doesn't exist, let me tell you why. I'm like, yeah, you have a good argument. You're justified for your belief. I have no issue with that. But when I hear people say, well, atheists are not justified to believe there are no gods, but they themselves identifying as atheist, I find that to be very odd. Why would you identify as atheist, but say atheists who claim there are no gods are not justified to do so? What else do you call a person who claims there are no gods? So that to me is where these atheists start becoming very, very irrational. All right, so and then real quick, this was the video that they were reviewing. Again, I'm not going to go through it. You want to go check it out. It is called "Yeah, I Don't Buy It," and it's a guy named Bitchspot Blog. The guy was completely inept. He had clearly no idea what he was doing. All he was doing was hand waving away Ben's arguments, and all Ben was doing. And I've been on Hayden's channel before. Hayden's a nice guy, and I do know Ben from Twitter, and we've never had any issues. I think he knows way more philosophy than I'll ever know. And the guy's a PhD student in philosophy, and I've never seen him put out anything that's just wrong ever. But not that I'm saying I'm qualified to critique it, but I mean, from my lay experience, I've never seen him put anything out there. But all this guy did was basically the entire time say, "Oh well, this guy is wrong because he's a poopy head, and he's just throwing religious arguments out there," and that's not what he was doing. All he was doing was saying, "Look, there are some possible arguments that theists can have that require a little bit more complexity to talk about, but generally speaking, if you're going to just go by the argument which is simpler, naturalism or supernaturalism, the theist might have a better case." And I'm not disagreeing with him. Matter of fact, Trolley Dave didn't disagree with him. Joe didn't disagree with him, Answer Reason, and Luke, who was on the show at the time when they did their review of this, were all in agreement. Ben I think is right on this. Naturalism, in some cases, is a less abductive explanation. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Okay? But it is more of a challenge for naturalists to explain certain things like moral agency. More of a challenge for naturalists to explain things like aesthetics. I completely agree with that. I have all the time. I've even said I happen to like the argument from aesthetics. Not saying that it convinces me, but when we look at something and we experience that spiritualism, right, that sense of awe and wonder, That's much more difficult to explain by naturalistic means. Not saying that it can't be. Matter of fact, why they were reviewing this, we were kind of sussing out why naturalistic reasons would be for that particular case. But a theist has it easy, right? A theist says, look, we have a moral agent that exists. The probability of 1, if God exists, we have a moral agent which you can draw from to have moral agency. We have a being that is a representation of pure beauty, which gives us aesthetics from which we can model that after, right? So, Heat Shield, the guy, he's a PhD. I can't remember his full name. He's I think Tim or something. He's coming on his real account, but he helped come up with some of the bugs. He's on my Twitter all the time. I'm sure you know him. But he's going to come on and talk about some of the things that he helped with the bugs in Minecraft. But as far as the aesthetics and the moral agency, yeah, I mean, I'm okay with giving a slight tick to the theist on that, because it is abductively probably a better explanation. But we're not talking about science, right? We're not talking about evidentialism. And so this guy, blog bitch spot, whatever, he kept going back to evidentialism, missing the point that this is not an evidential argument. This is a philosophical argument. This is not a empirical argument. This is a rational argument. And I don't think this guy had any understanding of what Ben was trying to say. Because if he did, he would not have criticized it the way he did. Right? And so he started, and one of the things he even wrote was something along the lines of, theists start off that God exists and therefore wish him into existence. And that's not what Ben was doing. Ben is not a theist. He's not starting with the premise God exists. Right? So, anyways, I thought I'd throw that out there. Again, I'm not going to go through this video. Just not worth it. But if you see us talking about it on Twitter, this is what we're referring to as this video about this new up-and-coming atheist who's, obviously going to get in with the atheist crowd because they, oh my God, this guy's crapping on people that are espousing religiosity and religious beliefs, even though he's literally calling a PhD atheist or PhD student who is a well-known respected atheist a Christian plant. That's how bad he didn't understand his arguments. I mean, but hey, we all get that, right? I'm accused all the time of being a secret theist. Charlie Dave is a secret theist. Surgeon General is a secret theist. Smitty's a secret theist. Heat Shield. All you guys are secret theists, apparently, because you happen to use reason in conjunction with empiricism. I think that when you have somebody who limits themselves in their epistemological profile to just empiricism, they've relegated themselves outside, excluded from the domain of philosophy, because they've boxed themselves into scientism. We see Aaron Ra do this exceptionally well. He does it all the time, and this guy is following in Aaron Ra's footsteps. They've boxed themselves into scientism and hyper-evidentialism. I think that's a horrible way to have epistemology. Horrible. I mean, in the domain of science, sure, but even in science, you go beyond empiricism. Go read a scientific paper. They use ethos, pathos, and logos to argue their paper. Here's the data, right? Which is logos. And here's the data. It's you can go repeat this experiment. You can objectively evaluate the data, but they still use reason to get you to accept that data. Because that data may not be right. That data might have errors. There might be errors in the methodological approach. It might be, again, they're just saying that this is more likely the explanation. If I do an experiment and you reject the null and you assume the null is true, which is another thing atheists, for some reason, think that atheism is a null. Okay, if that's the case, you're assuming atheism is true, which means it must be propositional, which means you must have an experiment to tell me how you reject atheism to accept theism. Which I don't think they understand that. When they say atheism is a null, they're literally saying atheism is a null position, which means we accept atheism as true, as something we should reject by experimentation. Okay, what's the experiment? What's your p-value? Why would you want to reject atheism? Wouldn't theism be the null? If they're really thinking about this, wouldn't they say theism is the null, and it's more likely that naturalism is a better explanation, which rejects theism. If naturalism is true, theism is false. There is an entailment there. Right? Would you guys agree that if naturalism is true, you cannot have supernatural? If you cannot have supernatural, you cannot know gods. Now, you can argue around that and say, well, if God exists, he's in the natural domain. Yeah, I get that. But let's arguendo say that God is a supernatural being, right? Because if you start arguing God is in the natural set, it's going to get messy real quick. I would put God in a supernatural set, which means something that's non-natural because it's so far removed from our understanding. If you're going to have any kind of connotation what we mean by natural, we are trying to explain the concept of something so far removed from our understanding that it does not have naturalistic explanations. It can violate the laws of physics at will. It can create at will. It can destroy at will. It can do things that we have no explanation for by natural formations of laws of physics, right? All that breaks down. Again, somebody could argue, well, that would just be a god in the natural set that can do that. Okay, whatever. But if naturalism is true the way most philosophers approach it, then God does not exist. So, wouldn't theism be the no? Because that's what we're trying to reject, to say that naturalism is the better explanation. I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, probably Dave, does that make sense to you? You know, I mean, if we're trying to say, look, naturalism is a better explanation for what we see, we want to be able to reject what we assume is true. And by the way, it's just, again, arguendo. Let's assume theism is true. Do we have enough evidence to reject that, to accept the hypothesis that God does not exist, or naturalism? Because I think naturalism is a better way to go in that particular instance. But that would be something we have to do by experiment. And atheists have never given any experiment for that. So I think calling atheism the null makes no sense to me whatsoever. I'm willing to take, argument on that. Maybe I'm way off on that, but I just don't understand why atheists would want to reject something that they hold as true. Because then they're saying, okay, let's do an experiment to try to show that theism is true in order to reject what they believe. You should start with what you don't believe, right? Because when you're trying to show a hypothesis to be true in an experiment, you want to show that your belief, your hypothesis, is the more likely explanation. You're trying to reject the fact that there might be other explanations out there that can explain. Because, again, when you do an experiment in statistical science and you reject the null, you're basically saying that your explanation is more likely. And you fail to reject, you're saying that some other explanation is more likely, right? Or at least you have not demonstrated it to be the case. That's why you fail to reject the null. You have failed to demonstrate that your explanation is more likely than some other explanation. So, Jen says, any reasonable person who would agree with this, some has to have an agenda. Oh, I would think so. I mean, again, I talk to a lot of people that are experts in statistics and maths, and I have not had one tell me that doesn't make sense. Not one. I have a friend who teaches statistics. He hates when atheists say, oh, atheism is a null hypothesis. He hates it. He hates it with a passion, because it's a misunderstanding of philosophy and statistics. As Frida says, I've been accused of being a theist many times. Usually it seems to be because I know a lot more about religions. I reject church doctrines and I refute the gods I deny. Yeah, no, I get that. No, I totally understand that. That's what I'm saying. I'm a non-believer, guys. I do not believe there's any gods. I have no God belief. But I don't identify as an atheist, therefore I'm not one of them. It's identity politics. Floyd FP says you're the one of us or against us. Yeah, that's what they think. And Floyd FP and I have been around for God knows how many years. Floyd knows when I started talking about this stuff 8 years ago. I really did it much more about 5 or 6 years ago. And Floyd FP saw the flack that I got from the atheist community. And Floyd and PFP and I were two people, along with Ozymandias Ramses II and Dr. Gary Edwards, going around trying to explain to atheists, look, this is how you should approach things like presuppositional argumentations. This is how you approach things using reason and logic and showing that the theist is making a bad presuppositional argument. Floyd XP is is just absolutely brilliant on that. But we get shot on for that. Now, I got shot on more than Floyd FP because people use that as a weapon against me. Even though I can tell you right now, Floyd FP never once said my arguments were wrong when it came to atheism. Not once. Right? Because he is right. They have the black and white fallacy. You are the with us or against us, and it's all identity politics. And I don't fit into that identity. Even though I'm rational, even though my arguments come with actual logical argumentation and citations. They don't care. it is a matter of, I don't identify as an atheist, therefore I don't fit into that group. It's to me, the antithesis of what free thinking is the antithesis of critical thinking. And I want myself and I want people that I associate with to be actual free thinkers. My audience always, I think, are free thinkers. I mean, the vast majority of my audience don't like echo chambers. They want to be challenged. They want to be challenged by a theist. They want to be challenged by an atheist. They don't care. They just say, okay, bring me your argument. And what they do is, if they don't understand the argument, they go figure it out. Or they say, look, I'm not at the position right now to address your argument. I get that. Look, if somebody presents to me Anselm's ontological argument, modal ontological argument, I'm not in a position to attack that logic. It's way beyond my level, first order logic. Do I understand what they're trying to do with it? Somewhat. And do I understand that it relies on certain axioms of modal logic in order to be valid? Yeah, I do. But I also understand that that axiom that it uses doesn't necessarily have to be used in logic. My analogy would be, you guys have heard of the Tarsky Paradox, right? Bench, how do you pronounce his name? I'd say Tarsky Paradox. But the Tarsky Paradox is, if you accept the axiom of choice and certain axioms in mathematics, you can have one, like a basketball, and mathematically you can prove that you can make it into two basketballs. Now, we automatically know that is nomologically impossible. We know you cannot have one basketball into two basketballs. But mathematics doesn't have to represent reality. People have a misconception about math. Math does not have to represent reality. So using that mathematical system, you can get 2 for 1. Why? Because you've accepted certain axioms. But people have looked into axioms when it's called ZFC theory. You don't have to take a lot of these axioms. You can pick and choose what axioms you want. And one of them is the axiom of choice. And so, Banach Tarsky. Yeah. Banach. I think it's Banach. I'm terrible at pronouncing these guys' names. Seriously. Banach. Ah, thank you. Okay, that sounds right to me. Banach. Thank you, Shield. See, my audience is much smarter than I am on this stuff. They automatically know what I'm talking about. They're like, see, you're just talking about stuff we all know. I know, whatever. Banach. Smitty says, I love echo chambers. That's why I hate this channel. You're right. I wish I had more challenge, Smitty. No, I had a guy I just told on Facebook group, come over and spew your nonsense. He won't do it. Well, I don't get into that. I don't want this to be an echo chamber. I want people to come over and challenge, but I want them to do so using reason and logic, but they won't. Oh, by the way, that is not the correct pin that I have on the screen right now to join. My bad. Let me get rid of that. So like I was saying, though, using certain axioms, you can prove certain things. So in Anselm's modal ontological argument for God, yeah, if you accept certain axioms, it's definitely valid. Soundness is a completely different thing, but it's certainly valid. It doesn't mean you have to accept it, right? I mean, again, it depends on the axioms you use. And then again, you can address whether it's sound or not. I mean, as Plantinga argues, his example is if 7 plus 5 equals 14, then if God exists, then 7 plus 5 equals 14. 7 plus 5 does not equal 14, therefore God exists. Now that is a valid argument. It's a disjunctive argument, disjunctive syllogism, right? It's just or, so P or Q, not Q, therefore P. So if God exists, God exists, or 7 plus 5 equals 14. Well, we know 7 plus 5 does not equal 14, so that disjunct goes away. You're left with God exists. So I think I said that wrong. So initially, so that is a valid disjunction. God exists, or 2 plus 2 equals 5. Well, 2 plus 2 does not equal 5, so that gets rid of that disjunction. So God exists. Now, to Plantinga, that is a sound argument, right? Now, we all agree. Anybody who knows logic knows it's perfectly valid. Now, I would not consider that a sound argument because I don't accept the premise that God exists. And also, you can just say, if God does not exist, then 2 plus 2 equals 5. 2 plus 2 does not equal 5, therefore God does not exist. And so there's two, quote, proofs out there that exist, both coming to a different conclusion depending on what premises you accept as true. Or more specifically, what atomic propositions you accept as true. So we don't know which one to be the case. One of them is valid and sound, depending on whether God exists or not, but we don't know, no idea which one. And so Plantinga recognizes that neither one of them are proofs. right? But he would accept as a theist that that is a valid and sound proof. So let's put an example for Trolley Dave, who is an atheist that believes there are no gods. If I said, Trolley Dave, God does not exist, or 2 + 2 = 5, 2 + 2 does not equal 5, therefore God exists, therefore God does not exist, that disjunction to him would be a valid and sound proof. But you have to understand that other people wouldn't accept that. Why? Because they don't accept the atomic proposition that God does not exist. I hope that makes sense, right? To me, that's not a sound argument. To Trolley Dave, that would have to be a sound argument because he accepts the premise that God does not exist. But he also would have to recognize it's not a proof to anybody. You can't go around saying, hey, here's my proof God exists. If God does not exist, and 2 + 2 = or if God does not exist, or 2 + 2 = 5, 2 + 2 does not equal 5, therefore God does not exist. He would have to recognize that other people may not accept that as a sound proof, clearly. So there's some complexities here. I'm not gonna review this particular video now. If you want to go watch the review, Trolley Dave, can you put in your video of it, please? I'll give you a mod here in a second. There you go. Trolley Dave, put your video in for the review, because you guys did a wonderful job and I have nothing to add to it. I didn't see anything you guys said that I didn't really agree with, so if you guys can put that in your tab to watch later, go watch Answers and Reason. Answers and Reason is one of my favorite channels. I don't get over their lives much, but I do watch their stuff. But my God, I am a huge fan of Answers and Reason, because they actually use philosophy. They actually use reason. And they're actually people who will tell you there are no gods. I admire that. And they're able to justify it. I admire that. You know, that guy that bit this blog, Bit Spot blog or whatever, I don't think he has justification for his positions. I don't even know what his position is. He might be one of those guys that say, look, I'm not saying there are no gods. Okay, why? You don't think the atheist arguments are good enough? Why? I'm so sick of people saying, well, I'm not claiming there are no gods. Okay, so you're philosophically agnostic like me. I'm not labeling you with that. You can call yourself an atheist. I don't care. You know, Floyd F.P. can tell you, I don't go around saying you're not a real atheist. That was a lie that people back then from the Great Debate community had put out, but I've never argued that. I don't play this no real atheist game. But philosophically speaking, it is an objective fact that is known as agnostic on the proposition. So I don't know if this guy blog is an agnostic on the proposition or what. But I really have a lot more. Sean Carroll, why did Keno time you out?
No, I actually didn't.
Oh, friendly. Oh, it's Friendly Fire. She's over there. Blame her. Keno, Friendly Fire. Man down, man down. Sorry about that, Sean Carroll. Keno has a headache. Okay, so forgive her. But she accidentally did that, so. Sean Carroll says, I was thinking that, but I would be further add a psychological fact. It's probably Dave. There exist certain personalities that have no business being in a debate, and no one side holds up monopoly. Absolutely agree, 100%. But like I said, I'm very sorry for that, Sean. I am blaming Kano, but like I said, Kano has a headache. All right, so anyways, Charlie, did you put the link into your video? And then, like I said, I'll put it into the live, the video description later on. All right, so moving on from there. I wanted to talk about this. This just amazed me. This is from 2008, and Brian, who I was talking to the other day, I had said, hey, do you want me to review and revamp your page of agnosticism? And I was referring to something on his wiki page. Well, not the actual wiki page, but his rational response wiki that he has. And he sent this, and I was like, dude, this is so jacked. This is so objectively wrong. This is not a matter of semantics. There's some objectively wrong things in here. He was having none of it. Because he's a nice guy, but he is an idealist. He's an ideologue. He is I'll have to say it, and I hate saying this because I happen to like the guy, but he is irrational. He is not rational. Atheists who will put out misinformation dealing with logic willfully so, merely for identity politics, merely for demographics, merely so you can identify as that title, is not rational. So the Rational Response Squad, people may know, was around a very long time ago, and they were known for the blasphemy challenge, which was basically to blaspheme against God, from which there's no redemption in this life and the next. Now, I think they had a fundamental misunderstanding of the blasphemy laws from Christianity. Every Christian I've talked to agrees what they did wouldn't be considered blasphemy to the point of non-redemption. But I get the point. I think it was actually interesting. I think it was, back to the time, something that was novel. I respect them for that. I think the Rational Response Squad did a brilliant job against Ray Comfort and his little buddy there. Whatever the hell's name. What's his buddy's name? Ray Comfort's name from whatever the show was. I don't even care. That's all to how little I respect those guys. But Rational Response Squad went on there, which was Byron Sapient, and I don't remember her name. I know she became a porn star. But they did a really excellent job. They did a really, really good job defeating the whole crocoduck stuff, because that's when Kirk Cameron. Yeah, that's when Kirk Cameron was like, "Oh, we don't see a crocoduck." That's where King Crocoduck got his name from. So the Rational Response Squad, huge props to them. They did some amazing stuff back in the day. But that doesn't mean they're rational. And I will call them out on this program that the Rational Response Squad has left the domain of rationality. Yeah, Kirk Cameron. And see what you guys think. So this says for a place for atheist activists to unite. But again, it's not about to them about atheist activism, because they don't advocate for atheism. To advocate for atheism, you have to give reasons for why you think atheism is a better position. And what are you going to argue? Oh, just non-belief? Non-belief is not a position. It's a second order belief system. So what are they activate? What is the activism here? It's not activism. It is identity politics. Yeah, we can't get Sean Carroll out of timeout. Sorry about that, Sean. So it says, I'm atheist or agnostic. And this is from Brian Sapient. Oh, I'm sorry. From 2006. I thought it was 2008. From 2006. And if this is not one of the worst arguments I've ever seen in my life, I don't know what would be. It's pretty bad. But again, Brian, who knows me, and he's a decent guy, he doesn't respect me enough to actually maybe trust my judgment on this, even though he can go verify this with any philosopher. He's like, what? And I literally asked him this question a couple days ago. I said, who agreed with you on this? And he's like, well, I asked experts. I'm like, any experts have any kind of degree or expertise or knowledge of philosophy? Or is it Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra? It was literally Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra was his experts, I think. He had no philosophical expert come in and weigh in on this. Right? I mean, if that's not an echo chamber, what would be? Right? I said, was it Dan Baker who reviewed this? And I think it was. Can't prove that. But I think it was Dan Baker and Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra. Those are the ones, the people that he would just... Because I knew I was associating with them at the time. Those were his mods originally. I know Matt Dillahunty was. So, where is the expertise to getting this reviewed from a person who actually knew what the topic was about? In the domain of which it was actually in, which is philosophy. Again, not an expert, but I do know experts, and they would tear this up. Kino Maki says, a second order belief setup is easy as pie, but when it's unfamiliar, it's baffling. Yeah, well, it just means it's an indirect belief on the proposition, right? A direct belief is a first order belief because it's on the proposition. If I ask you, does God exist? You say yes, you're a theist. You're saying no, you're an atheist. It's a direct answer. Those are direct beliefs on that question, or that proposition of that question. But if I say I have no position either way, I'm agnostic, I don't care, I'm apatheist, those are indirect positions. Those are second order positions because they're not direct. And I remember Matt Dillahunty got so pissed off when I had made my flow chart. And the very first question I started with was the great debate question, does God exist? And he's like, Steve's asking the wrong question. I am? Really? That's been the great debate question for how many centuries? Does God exist? Because he knows if you answer yes to that, you're considered a theist. And if you answer no, you're considered an atheist. So what? There's no manipulation there. There's no sophistry there. It's a straightforward question. Does God exist? Trolley Dave will straight up say no. But unfortunately that leads to some nuance there of people like myself who I don't say yes or no. And they want to eliminate that position. They want to incorporate and subsume that position in the atheism. For demographics, which is, again, dishonest. So, am I an agnostic or atheist? The definition of the atheist, Oxford English Dictionary. Now, let me make it very clear. Oxford English Dictionary is a synchronic dictionary. It's not diachronic. Now, there are diachronic versions, but diachronic means that it shows historical uses over time. Synchronic means that it shows the uses of modernity. It doesn't describe it. Doesn't prescribe it at all. It doesn't mean, hey, here's the definition, you must use it this way. Nope, that's not how Oxford works. It's saying that this word is being used this way in certain domains, right? And unfortunately, because lay atheists have butchered atheism and atheology, they've tried to get atheism to be the lack of belief that God does not exist. This started in 1972 with Flu's paper, The Presumption of Atheism, which did not go over too well. So they're the ones that are going to have a change. Matter of fact, David Silverman admits that he had people try to write these people, like Merriam-Webster and Oxford, and have all these definitions changed to reflect their usage. This was a targeted, conservative effort to have that usage in the dictionary changed, because the way they were using it was in the negative. So his argument was that even though his quote was basically along the lines of, even though atheism is the belief that God does not exist, I want to be thought of the negative. That was his argument. So they were actively trying to change the dictionary. So Oxford English Dictionary is only showing somebody how a word is being used. And there's something called equivocation, which we're going to get into, which I don't think Brian understands. All right, so here's how OED defines atheism. Atheism, disbelief or denial in the existence of God. Okay, disbelief in logic is understood as the belief that God is the negation of the proposition. If you believe the proposition is false, it is the epistemic disposition of disbelief. That's been well established. Denial is the same thing. If I deny P, that means I believe P is false. Okay, this is what it means in epistemology. You can use it some other way, you can use a colloquial, but in epistemology and logic, that is the normative usages. Matter of fact, if you don't believe me, that's fine, but I'll throw it up there anyways. Hang on, let me grab this real quick. Oh, no, I unplugged it. Never mind. I take my thumb drive out where I have a lot of my stuff. My ring light uses too much wattage. Won't work my thumb. But if you go to my Twitter thing, I've shown Rutgers. You have, if you believe it's true, if you hold the proposition true, it's belief. If you hold it false, it's disbelief. You have no position either way, it's suspending judgment. So this is saying that atheism is a belief that God does not exist. That's what this means. That is what this means. Okay? Disbelief, transitive, not to believe or credit, refuse credence to, or statement, alleged, or fact, to reject the truth reality of. Now, again, reject means to believe false, or to assert as false. It mostly means to believe false, but this is a different usage of the term, disbelief. This is not the same thing of, when this is his fallacy, equivocation. When it says atheism, disbelief in or denial of the existence of God, it is saying disbelief as in the belief false. The disbelief as a transitive verb means to be in astonishment, to refuse to believe. You see a horrific accident, you stare in disbelief. An unwillingness to accept the reality of this happened. You're in shock. You're in stark disbelief of what's going on. It's not saying that you're asserting it as false. It is your unwillingness to accept it as true. That's a psychological phenomenon. This right here shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the English language, because this is a fallacy of equivocation. When I say that I stare in disbelief, it means that I have a mental refusion to accept what is going on. And there's other sources that'll say that that's exactly it. The mental rejection of reality. Just stare in disbelief. You're not accepting what is going on. How can people not see the difference there? Because If in logic, disbelief means to hold a proposition as false, it is not the same thing to mean I stare in disbelief. A mental unwillingness to accept is not the same thing as to assert something as false. Does everybody kind of agree with that? Does everybody accept that? Because this, to me, I see as fallacious. All right. Denied. To contradict or gainsay, to declare to be untrue or untenable, or not to be what is stated. Well, that's more along the lines of logic, yeah. Logic, to oppose or affirm, to assert a contradictory of a proposition. There you go. Logic, to assert the contradictory of. What is the contradictory of something being true? It is to be false. You are asserting the negation in disbelief. If I say I disbelieve P, I am asserting the negation of P. I'm not staring in disbelief of it. I mean, this is so poorly written, I have no words to describe how irrational this is. When you're literally using a fallacy of equivocation to a bunch of atheists you're trying to get on your side as being named the Rational Response Squad. I mean, come on. And it tells you right here. Now again, this is not defining it. This is telling you how the word is being used in logic. It is to affirm the opposition or to oppose the affirmation, which is to affirm negation. To assert the contradictory of a proposition. If P is God believe, that God exists, then the contradiction of that is not P, which is God does not exist. It's not the negation of the belief. It's not I do not believe, which he makes some mistakes going into. It is the negation of the proposition. So P and not P are contradictories. Now, there are some really nuanced discussions to be had whether theism and atheism are contradictories or contraries. I get in a discussion with a friend of mine named Stephen Hoyt, who is an epistemologist. He's not wrong and I'm not wrong. It is how you want to view it, because it is, what is you referring to? The belief or the God existence of the belief that makes it a contradictory or not, right? So Grant Oppy says that theism and atheism are contradictories. Explicitly, they're contradictories, meaning if one is true, the other must be false. They both can't be true and they both can't be false. This is based upon God's existence. If God exists, then theism is true. And atheism must be false. If God does not exist, theism is false and atheism must be true. But they both cannot be true. Why? Because God cannot exist and not exist at the same time, right? There's the law of excluded middle that comes into play there. So bivalence principle. So it is a fact that God must exist or God does not exist. So one of those conditions must be the case that it is the statement God exists or God does not exist. They are called contradictories. Now, there's an argument to be made that they're contraries. That the beliefs themselves, both of them can be held at the same time, or both of them may not be held at the same time, right? A contrary is something that one must be true, the other must be false. Both cannot be true at the same time, but both can be false at the same time. I can have neither belief. I cannot believe God exists, and I cannot believe God does not exist, which is an agnostic position. So when we're talking about the beliefs, then theism and atheism are contraries. We're talking about, ontologically speaking, whether the statements of the propositions are true or not, then they're contradictories. And I hope that makes sense. Corey says, word salad. Well, if you think it's word salad, you might want to go read some papers on this, because it's not word salad. It's actually based on Graham Oppy's work. It's based on Dr. Demi's work, Dr. Burgess Jackson, Dr. Alex Malpass, Dr. Paul Draper, Dr. Bruce McCormick. I mean, the list goes on. So my audience, I assure you, understands this. So when somebody says word salad, to me, that usually is indicative that they have no actual education on the topic, nor do they want to. But stick around and you'll get to understand these terminologies. Okay, Corey? Does anybody else think this word salad so far? I mean, does people not know what a contradictory is? P or not P? Anybody not understand that? All right, so going on. To refuse to admit to refuse to admit the truth or doctrine or tenet, to reject as untrue or unfounded, the opposite of assert or maintain. Yeah, and that kind of mixes in both things here, right? I mean, if I deny an application for a job interviewee, right? If a guy comes in and says, "Hey, I want a job," for non sequitur. And I deny his application. It's not propositional. There's no propositionality to be had there. I'm just not accepting your application. Right? But when I say we refuse to admit the truth, that again is more disbelief, as in I refuse to accept that the conditions are the way they are. This tragic accident harmed somebody that I care about. I'm staring at disbelief. To refuse to recognize or acknowledge person or thing as having a certain character or certain claims to disown, disavow, repudiate, or renounce. Yeah, and that's more of using obviously a legal term or things of that nature. But I deny your citizenship of the United States. You weren't born here, not naturalized. You have no visa. I'm denying something about you. Right, even though you're asserting that you're an American citizen, I can deny that. Now, that might be a bit of a stretch, but yeah, I mean, you're denying something about an individual or a thing, right? If I say I deny circles are round, I'm not being rational, but I can certainly do it. I can say, look, I deny that circles. I deny. It doesn't mean I'm not saying, in this particular sense of the word, it doesn't mean I'm saying that circles aren't round. In logic, it would mean that. In logic, when I say I deny the proposition that circles are round, I'm saying that that's false. That the circles are not round. Do you see how these words have usages? Do you understand that all these words that irrational people like Brian take and they use in order to confuse people and manipulate them into their way of thinking? If that's not religiosity, I don't know what is. When you're having to use equivocation to your argument, you don't have a good argument. And all my arguments, my WASP argument, my A.E.C argument, and other arguments I've had, there's no equivocation. I make it very clear what I mean by these words. I set them out from the beginning. Now, this idiot that I was talking to on Facebook, he thinks that those means that I'm prescribing definitions. No. I'm saying, here's my initial condition for the definition. It's going to change as we go. Why? Because that's how the argument works. It's an initial assumption, right? I'm not violating my initial assumption because I'm not prescribing it must be this case. I'm prescribing it this, but then I'm adding thing onto that definition. I'm modifying as we go. And if you go to read anything on Stanford Encyclopedia as far as epistemological things, they modify things each time they go and they say, well, this doesn't work too well. Let's modify it this way. Go read about safety or sensitivity when it comes to possible world theory and justified true belief. They'll start off with S. S believes, S knows P is true if S fails to deny it in the next possible world or something. And then they go, well, you can say it this way, and they'll modify it, right? That's philosophy. That's philosophizing, okay? So when you start off with a definition, when I wrote my paper for the atheist semantic collapse argument, I'm just using it descriptively. I'm saying, okay, theists can be described this way. And a theist is described by a person who believes there are no gods, or a person who believes there's gods. That's a description. It doesn't say that's the only way a theist can be. My argument goes on to conclude that if you argue that not believing in gods is atheism, that not believing in gods don't exist is theism. They're both what's called the subalterations. So if you're arguing that believing God does not exist and not believing God does not exist, are both atheism, that's arguing that the belief God does not exist and the I don't believe God exists are both that term, that semantic term atheism, although one is a subalteration of the other, because by implication, if you believe God does not exist, you do not believe God does exist. That's an implication. So subalterations exist because of implications. They're not logically entailment. They're only entailed because of an implication. And a logical entailment would be believe P or not believe P, right? So I either believe God exists or I do not believe God exists. That is a logical dichotomy, but it's not by implication. It is by the law of excluded middle. So again, there's some complexities to be had here. But the atheist who argues that they don't believe God exists, therefore that's atheism, the theist can do the same thing. Well, I don't believe God does not exist. That's the argument. That the subalteration that you're calling semantically atheism, I'm arguing a theist can do the exact same thing, else with special pleading in my WASP argument. And then I actually show, using logic, Boolean logic, that it leads to this kind of semantic collapse. So a lot of those theists, that I've read it, of course, they accept it. Most atheists that are educated in logic, they accept it. But the ones that don't, they don't understand that my definitions are not prescribing.
And
I've not released my paper. I mean, what I have on my blog is really, really watered down. And some of you guys have read it, so you know that I'm not talking out my ass. My paper is really, I think, a lot more scholarly than people give me credit for. But let me see if I can add this here. Because again, my thumb drive, I keep everything on a thumb drive because I just don't have a lot of space any longer because all the crap that I got on this computer. And I don't want to have to plug the thumb drive in because then I lose my light. So let me see if I can. I think I saved it to my drive here. I did. All right, so let me. This I will show because I just give people an example. So, anyways, this is from my actual paper. Okay, this definition that I use here is not a prescribed definition. I'm just saying that the contradictories using phi and sine phi are contradictories given the logical system that entails this system that I described above using Dr. Demi's system. Okay, so this is a property that contradictories have based upon the square of oppositions given these conditions. They must exist this way. Okay, and by that usage, by that definition of what I'm describing to be contradictories, and then I go on to form the argument. Then I go on to use Boolean argumentation by using an exclusive or truth table. So it requires a little bit of understanding of the topic, obviously. But that definition is merely describing what I'm using based upon the square of opposition. It's not saying it has to be this way. I'm just saying that based upon what a square of opposition would be as far as the subalterations, you have subalterations on the side, you've got contradictories on the top, and you have contraries on the bottom. This has been well established. This is nothing new. I'm not creating anything new. This is how a square of opposition works for categorical, all SRPs, that kind of thing. This is just taking the square of opposition, taking what Burgess-Jackson used the square of opposition for, taking what Dr. Demi used it for, and combining them together to have a synthesis to my argument. That's how most papers work, right? You draw on other people's works. Yeah, I know. I'm going to figure something out in Ash again. I might move the table. I'm probably just going to get real acoustic for this wall because I really don't want to move the table. But then I can't, change the background. So if I move my desk over, I'm going to get better lighting. Anyways, do we have anybody who doesn't agree in the live chat? Hey, welcome back, Sean. Sorry for your time out. Word salad is more of a word salad is no more than a narcissistic insult from people out of arguments. Yeah, I agree. Well, they haven't said anything since. They haven't really explained their position. So, have they? Yeah, go figure. All right, so continuing on here. Note that the OED definition covers the whole spectrum of atheist belief, from weak atheism, those who do not believe or credit the existence of God, existence of one or more gods, to strong atheism, those who assert the contrary position that God does not exist. Okay, so let's look at that. He does actually agree, right, that the position that God does not exist, right, the strong atheism, those who assert God does not exist, is atheism. Okay, great. That's a start, right? I mean, what else do you call that kind of person? What else would you call somebody who has the position there are no gods? Now, I've heard people go into Gnostic atheism and agnostic atheism, whatever, and it's just. Then I asked them for a citation for that. I asked them of where are you getting this from, because that's completely pulled out of people's ass. But he at least recognizes that strong atheism is the assertion that God does not exist. Okay, great. Now, I just call that atheism, right? I mean, Charlie Dave just calls it atheism. Hey, what is your position? Oh, God doesn't exist. Okay, you're an atheist. Yeah. He doesn't go around saying he's a strong atheist because there's no need to, because that's what's normative. Right? So the argument goes, okay, well, he also accepts weak atheism as atheism. Right? So he accepts strong atheism as an atheist. Right on. And he accepts weak atheist as an atheist. Problematic. Because now what happens is, if you have a strong theist, somebody who asserts there's a God, you have to allow them to have weak theism. Those who do not believe that God does not exist. Else you are special pleading. Nobody has refuted that argument yet. Nobody. And I go into these Facebook groups and I'm like, okay, well, what's the argument against this? And then the amount of time they spend not understanding the argument is ludicrous. Because I even asked them, what am I arguing here? And they cannot reiterate to me what my argument is. Their argument comes back, oh, you're just forcing everybody to take your label. No. You're just forcing everybody who is not claiming there's a God not to be an atheist. No. None of those are my arguments. All right. No, let's see here. Here? I hope you guys can see this on the side. Here's the OCD's definition of agnostic. Agnostic. One who holds the existence of anything beyond and behind material phenomena is unknown, and so far as can be judged, unknowable, especially that a first cause, an unseen world are subjects of which we know nothing. Now again, that describes a particular type of agnostic. Words have usages. If you read SCP, agnostic is somebody who has a position that they are unjustified to have a direct position. They suspend judgment. They do not believe God exists, and they do not believe God does not exist. Okay. There's many different usages of that word agnostic. People can argue there's what's called temporal agnostic, but that's in the epistemological domain. People can argue strong and weak agnosticism. Those are in the epistemological domain. This is in the epistemological domain. But when you're asking about God existence, you're not in the epistemological domain. You're in the ontological domain. You're asking about existential questions. Existential is based on ontology, being. So if I'm asking you, does God exist? I don't care about your knowability. Yeah, it's a different proposition about, are gods knowable? Who the hell cares? Why is that even a thing? Where else in philosophy do you care whether things are knowable or not, unless you're talking about skepticism? Right? These are skeptics' arguments, whether something is knowable or not. The academic skeptic says things aren't knowable. The Pyrrhonian skeptic says, we don't even know if we don't know. We don't even know what we don't know. We have no idea if gods are knowable or not. We have no idea. Knowledge is not something we can acquire. And there are actual decent arguments for skepticism. I think there's ways to assail them by pleading to what's called internalism or externalism. I kind of vacillate between internalism and externalism. I think right now I'm tending more to externalism only because I don't want to have to deny what's called the epistemic closure principle. Novak and Dresky both deny the epistemic closure principle to get around Morean shifts and Morean arguments of I have a hand, or here's a hand. That is a way to deny the skeptic's arguments by shifting the skeptic argument into a modus tollens, which is a denial of their arguments. So, in a way to rephrase it, that you can approach it more from an paternalist or externalist point of view. But you can assail the skeptic argument. I believe knowledge is possible. Now, could I be wrong with that? Sure. Could skepticism be the way to go? Maybe. But we're not talking about, I just don't believe you. I doubt things. I don't have such credulity that I'm open-minded to believe in anything without some reason. There's different uses of the term skepticism. Nowadays, when atheists talk about the word skepticism, they just mean they don't believe things very easily. They doubt things. Now, again, doubt is not a virtue. And that's fine. They can use it that way. I got no issue with that. But when I'm talking about skepticism in the philosophical sense, skeptics deny the existence of knowledge. They say knowledge doesn't exist. You can't have knowledge. You can have belief, but you can't have knowledge, which means you can't have certitude. Right? So again, these words have very different usages in these different domains. So when OED is defining agnostic, it's talking about the epistemological domain, and even one possible usage of agnostic in the epistemological domain. But my argument to that is, who cares? Whether they have knowledge of gods or not. I don't care whether you believe we can know gods or not. I mean, sure, whatever. It's interesting. What I want to know is your stance on the ontological question. What is it you believe? Do you believe that there's no God? Do you believe there is a God? What's your position ontologically? If you have no position either way, if you do not believe there's a God and you do not believe there isn't a God, that is referred to as agnostic as well. Is agnostic on the proposition. So you guys see the equivocation fallacy going on here? It's like, this is how it's defined here. That's how we must use it. Which is a fallacious argumentation. It's actually even more insidious than that. It's actually appealing to a dictionary. Argumenting about dictionarium. And again, this is rational response squad. This is not rational. Webster's Third New International Dictionary, unabridged. Here's Webster's definition of atheism. A disbelief in the existence of God or any other deity. The doctrine. People say, atheism is not a doctrine. Yeah, it is. Webster defines it that, says that it is, and there are other places that uses the word doctrine. The doctrine that there is neither God nor any other deity compared to agnosticism, godliness in conduct. Again, these are descriptors. But when it says disbelief in the existence, it is to be understood as the belief that God does not exist. Now look what he does here. He says disbelief, the act of disbelieving, mental refusing to accept. That's a different sense of the word. That's an equivocation fallacy. Going up here, he even puts up here. Deny. Logic. The opposition to affirm. The assert the contradictory of. To disbelieve is to deny the proposition. It is to assert negation. And I really wish I had, and I do, you know what? I do have it somewhere. So let me put this up on the screen so you guys do know what I'm talking about. So give me 1 second here. I'll find it. Image. I'm just lousy at finding. Here we go. That's it. I found it off bad. I just didn't name it when I should have. All right, so this is Rutgers University Philosophy 101. I think it was taken out of the curriculum from 2017, 16, 18, something around those lines. It's not very old. But it says very clearly, if you conclude that a proposition is false, then the appropriate attitude, these are propositional attitudes, towards a belief or towards that proposition is disbelief. If you conclude that a proposition is false, then the appropriate attitude toward that proposition is disbelief. It's not staring at disbelief. It's not refusing to accept. It is, you're saying it's false. These are epistemic attitudes. There's 3. Belief, disbelief, and suspension of judgment. Belief, God exists, theism. Disbelief, disbelief God exists, atheism, which is a belief that God does not exist. And suspension of judgment, agnosticism. If you are unable to reach a conclusion concerning the truth value of P, then the appropriate attitude towards P is suspension of judgment. If you go read Dr. Feynman's paper, her paper from New York State College, or New York State University, she has a paper called Suspending Judgment, which talks about all this, about agnosticism being the suspension of judgment, that if you cannot come up with a truth value, if you don't hold the proposition true or false, you're agnostic on the proposition. Again, a different sense of the word than what he has here for the epistemological domain. This is a fallacy that he's using. Sean asked me, from what I can tell, do they know what a non-cog is? Non-cogs would laugh at the response, and probably ours too. Probably, yeah, no. A non-cognitivist, a theological non-cognitivist, would have to say that all these are not propositions. That the statement, God exists, is non-propositional. It cannot hold a truth value. Because they hold that all conversations dealing with God is nonsensical. They're atheists, but their atheists are also explicitly stating that the statement, God exists, does not express a proposition that has a truth value. So, me and Ozzy had long talks on this, and I think we're complete agreement, if I'm not mistaken. But we both seem to agree that an agnostic is somebody who just thinks that the discourse is meaningless. These words have no cognitive meaning. Appia argues by doing so, it doesn't point to anything that exists, therefore that he would put agnostics under atheism, under that understanding. But the atheist would come back and say, no, you can't put me under any category, because theist, not theist, atheist, not theist, they're meaningless. There's no categories to be had there. It's like blurgle and not blurgle. Well, what the hell does that even mean to an agnostic, right? To us, we don't. Are you a blurgle or you're a non-blurgle? And neither. These are meaningless categories. That's the way the atheist would approach it. But the theological non-cognitivist would take it one step further and say, look, it is so meaningless that the statement God exists is not even a propositional statement. It does not hold a truth value. And they would laugh at that, all that. Sure. But you know how many true, I'm not going to play the no true agnostic game, but you know how many true agnostics I've ever met online that can actually articulate the agnostic position and justify it? None. Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a few, but anyways, getting back into this. So this is equivocation right here. This is argumentation by dictionary. This is everything that an atheist that wants to say that they're rational should eschew. They should actually call this out and say, look, you're arguing like a creationist. You're playing word games and semantic games by arguing from a dictionary. It's childish. To disbelieve, to hold not to be true or real, reject or withhold belief. Yeah? Again, those are these usages. But we've already established that the proper epistemic status to have if you believe something is false is disbelief. So if you read on a paper, S disbelieves P, it is understood as S believes P is false, not just withholding affirmation. Note again the strong 1B and weak 1A atheism are included in the definition. Well, again, if you're going to hold that weak and strong atheism are both atheism semantically, then what's your argument that theists cannot hold strong and weak theism as theism? Nobody's giving an argument for that. Nobody. They say, well, by definition, theism is the belief that God does not exist. Well, wait a minute. By definition, atheism is the belief that God does not exist if you want to play that game, if you want to go by formalities. Well, here's a definition that says otherwise. Okay, well, now you're just picking what descriptive definition you want to use. If Oxford English Dictionary is synchronic and it reflects usages, then if theists all got together and they said, look, we're going to start using the term theism in our publications to mean somebody who does not believe God does not exist, the dictionary, the Oxford English Dictionary, would eventually reflect that usage. And so it would have atheism, the belief or lack of belief that gods exist; theism, the belief that God does not, theism, the belief that gods exist, or the lack of belief that God does not exist. It would reflect those usages. And an atheist could not say anything about it or it's special pleading. They're like, oh, that's a hypothetical. Well, yeah, so what? What's your argument against that hypothetical? Oh, I don't do hypotheticals. Okay, then you know what? You don't have any reason to even talk to me. You know, philosophy deals with hypotheticals for a reason, right? I mean, science deals with hypotheticals for a reason. Dark matter is a hypothetical thing, but do we have reason to believe it exists? Yes. Why? Because of actual, what's called empirical evidence. That shows something there. But it's hypothetical because we don't know what it is. There's a difference there, right? So we can hypothesize based upon empirical evidence that it is non-baryonic, non-photonic matter. Those are hypotheses. We can hypothesize from that. But they're saying, oh, I don't do hypotheticals. Well, then you just excluded most of science. Then he goes on to say, good people consider themselves agnostics. By this, they mean to identify themselves as doubters on the question of God's existence. I don't know anybody who does that, except that they doubt God's existence and they doubt God's non-existence. You've left off one half of the coin there, right? The agnostic doubts both sides of that coin. The agnostic doubts God exists, and the agnostic doubts God does not exist. He just by fiat says, well, they doubt the question, God exists. Well, yeah, but they also doubt God does not exist. You've taken away a very important point there. They usually hold to this position of doubt because reason compels them to doubt the existence of any God. Okay. Their express reason for this is clear. While their reason leads them to doubt the claims of... I skipped something here. Yet they resist calling themselves atheists because they also want to hold their disbelief tentatively. No, they resist themselves calling themselves atheists because they're not atheists. They don't hold the belief that God does not exist. They're not strong, what you would call strong atheist. And they don't accept weak atheism as atheism. Just like they don't accept weak theism as theism. But if you accept weak atheism as atheism, you absolutely have no grounds to deny weak theism as theism. You have no justification for that. Their express reason for this is clear. While their reason leads them to doubt the claims of theism, reason also demands that they keep an open mind on the question of God. Well, no, that's a different question. That deals with virtue epistemology. One of the virtues in virtue epistemology is being open-minded, which just means you're willing to change your position given sufficient reason to. And that's most people. I think very few people are so intransient that they refuse to change their position because that gets into delusion. If you refuse to change your position based upon facts, there's an argument to be made. There's a delusionary belief to be had there. You know, if I say, hey, look, I have a cup. I have evidence in the cup, and I just deny that. If I say, look, there's no cup there. There's no cup here. That would be a form of delusion. unless somebody can justify it. Now, there are ways of justifying that. Matter of fact, I'm going to throw this out there to you guys. I think if Charlie Dave is still awake, I know it's late for him, he might be asleep. But give me an example of when I can say, look, this cup in my hand, it doesn't exist. There's no such thing as this cup. Give an example of philosophy where that actually would be a viable statement without being a delusion. Anybody? There's a theory of philosophy that statement is perfectly justified and is actually kind of rational. I can actually say in a theory of philosophy that I actually find to be very compelling, there's no such thing as this cup. You guys tell me what that is. See if you guys can guess what it is. First one to guess gets a big shout out and a cyber hug. If you're one such person, then it might be interesting to know that your doubt actually makes you an atheist. No, it doesn't. Not agnostic. No, it doesn't. That's just false. Absolutely false. Doubt is not a virtue. Doubt does not make you an atheist. Okay? And there's different understandings of the word doubt. We don't go out trying to doubt everything. A virtue is something that we strive to do all the time. We want to be virtuous. We don't want to be doubters. Not solipsism. Although you might be able to, you can make an argument for a form of solipsism, but I don't subscribe to that. So that doesn't work for me, Frida. I don't think solipsism is a good argument. So try again. But there is a hard form of solipsism, not dealing with external minds, that things that don't exist, that have no object permanence in reality, or idealism, sure. And it's Frida, but that's not what I'm referring to. I'm actually, to me, there's something that's really, really rational to say, well, there's no cup. Right. I know my green screen cup would be this. This actually has my warm coffee in it. This has old coffee, and I don't know why I drink it. This is actually warmer coffee. The Matrix, no. Why is this so? Because the word theism simply implies a belief in God. Well, the word atheism implies a belief God does not exist. This again, Brian Sapient just neglects, just by fiat neglects. Therefore, you find yourself identifying yourself primarily as a doubter of the existence of God, then you're an atheist. No, that's not what in the word atheist means. This is a fundamental mistake. It is established in philosophy that in atheos comes from the Greek alpha privative that represents not as a negation, not as without. Without is the etymological roots. So when you say atheism without God, that's telling you the etymology of the word. It doesn't tell you the usage of the word. And so when you say atheism is without gods, therefore anybody without God is an atheist, you're committing an etymological fallacy. And I'm really tired of people saying they're rational when they commit fallacies. It drives me nuts because these are non-believers. These are my people. Tribalism here. I'm a non-believer. I don't like it when non-believers are irrational. It looks bad on all of us. This is irrational because it's long established that in atheism is the negation of the proposition. Not negation of the belief, but of the proposition. Stanford backs that up and Cambridge backs that up. Someone who does not hold to a belief, a God, someone who does not accept the claims of theists, that's all the term means, a position of non-acceptance, a position of non-belief. That's just by fiat. That's just assertion. It's not all it means. That is easily disproved. Go read a philosophical paper. Go read P. Moser, who says simple atheism is God does not exist. That's simple atheism. God does not exist. That one statement in that paper means that there are other usages. So you can't just say that term just means what you think it means. That's your assertion. Has nobody got this right yet outside there? Do you guys want a hint? It's 2 words. And the second word is nihilism. So 2 words, second word is nihilism. You should be able to figure out that what I'm talking about. To say, look, this cup doesn't exist. And it might be the case. And it's not disbelief. I mean, clearly there's something that is going on here. But in this particular form of philosophy, there's no solid cup here. It's just an arrangement of primitives. And so the arrangement of primitives is kind of like, okay, if you have a dot matrix printer and you form a picture, is there a real picture there? Does that picture have ontology? Even though you start removing dots, the picture goes away. When is no longer a picture? This is the ship of Theseus problem. So there's a position of philosophy that actually addresses that, which actually is really interesting. Original Nielsen says, why do they get that A thing wrong all the time? Because they don't care. They don't care. It doesn't suit their beliefs. It doesn't suit their narratives. They have an echo chamber. Anybody who tells them otherwise, they think is a theist. Anybody who tells them otherwise must be shilling for God or something. Even though it's objectively the case, you can go read about this. Non-cognitive nihilism? No. Oh, God, you guys are killing me. It is the fallback position. The position one holds when it holds to when a claim is unsupported and unproven. No, it's not. No, it's not. And how do you prove a claim? The only thing you can prove is logic. You know? Yet you might feel that the word atheist still implies more than what you actually hold to. A common response to hearing that one is an atheist is to say, but I don't disbelieve, I just don't believe. But take a look, okay, this is so bad here. But take a look at those words carefully. Okay, let's do that. If you literally don't disbelieve, then by double negation you believe. Okay, no. No. Can I steal from Emily D. Baker? That's fuckery. No. A double negation is not P in non-intuitionist logic. Not P is P. Now in intuitionist logic you can't use that inference. You have to derive P other ways. But in non-intuitionist logic, not P is double negation. Not P is not double negation. I had the same argument Aryan, and he gets it wrong. A lot of atheists gets this wrong. But look at the word disbelieve here. He's trying to use disbelieve in a very different sense than the disbelief that even says above to deny the proposition or to accept as false. Disbelief means to accept as false. I do not believe X is true, or I do not believe P is true is not a double negation. So if I say I do not believe that there is no God, it does not mean I believe there's a God. It just means I don't accept the proposition as false. And this is easily, if Brian would just stop and think for a second how easy this is to prove in your head to yourself. If you change God does not exist, right? That should just not P. God does not exist, not P. Where P is God exists and not P is God does not exist. So not P. If I say I do not believe not P, which is not P, it's just saying that I don't accept not P. But by not accepting not P, we all know that doesn't mean you accept P. God, this sounds weird, right? But if you don't accept not P, if you don't say, hey, look, I'm not affirming not P, but I'm not rejecting and I'm not saying it's false. I'm just saying that I don't accept not P. It doesn't mean you accept negation. You could just not accept neither. That's the agnostic position. And Scott actually, Brian actually says somewhere, well, if you don't accept the proposition as false, it doesn't necessarily mean you accept it as true. That's true. But here is using the word disbelief as in some other ways to say, look, I don't as a double negation, but it's not what they're saying when you say disbelief. So when you say I do not believe something is false, that is not a double negation. Just stop saying those are double negations. They're not. One negator is on the propositional content, which is the proposition, and one's on the predicate, which is belief, or the epistemic disposition. So when they say, you literally don't disbelieve, then by double negation you believe. No, I do not disbelieve P is related as I do not believe P is false. Just change. Disbelieve P means I believe not P. Right? That's the same thing. So disbelieve is the exception of negation. I do not disbelieve means that I do not believe P is false. You can just change it right over. If you see disbelieve P, you just disbelieve P, you can change it as I don't believe not P. No, disbelieve P means I believe P is false. That's it. So disbelieve P, I believe P is false. Believe not P, right? So don't disbelieve can be literally changed to I do not believe P is false. Now, if you do not believe P is false, does that mean you believe P is true by necessity? Of course not. Come on. Do you guys seeing how Brian is using misunderstandings of basic logic and then thinks everybody else has the problem? And that he's relegated himself to a echo chamber of people that just support this by fiat because reasons? But what logician would agree with this? What philosopher would agree with this? Not a single one I know of. Because it's just a bad semantic argument. And by the way, it's equivocation because he's talking above about disbelief just means you fail to accept. You mentally have a status that you just fail to accept, right? You stare in disbelief. I don't stare in disbelief. How does that make any sense? Right? I mean, disbelief up here. To refuse credence to. I don't to refuse credence to. What? That doesn't make any sense. To reject the truth of reality. I don't reject the truth of reality. Okay, does that mean that what does that mean? It means that you accept reality as true or you have no position either way. Right? I can be agnostic on the truth of reality. I'm not rejecting it, but I'm not accepting it. That is that third position that Brian and other new atheists seem to want to get rid of. Do you guys not yet come up with what it was? The answer to my question was mereological nihilism. Do you guys not remember mereological nihilism? Mereological nihilism is the position that all this is a rearrangement of primitives that exist, of atoms. So therefore, there's no ontological nature to this cup. Because it's just a rearrangement of primitives. The cup doesn't exist. What exists is just the arrangement that we call a cup, but it's not something that actually has real ontology. And think about it, it's mostly space in there anyways. Atoms are what, 99.9999% empty space? And when I say empty space, I mean not having matter. I'm not saying that it doesn't have Higgs field or quantum fluctuations or, whatever. But when I say empty space, I mean there's no mass. So atoms have a lot of empty space. So this is just, what we think is solid is not. In fact, we know it's just repulsion of atoms when I touch it. Oh, that coffee's cold. Okay. Oh, Sean Carroll doesn't even discuss it. I'm sorry. My bad. Yeah, it's definitely the ship of Theseus thing, right? If I have the ship of Theseus and I remove one part, it's still the ship of Theseus? If I remove the engine of an Impala, 1967 Impala, and I remove the engine, it's still an Impala? Well, yeah, but is it much of an Impala? It's a shell. If I just have the chassis of a 1967 Impala, is it an Impala? No, it's just a chassis. If I replace every part of that 67 Impala, is it the same car? Well, clearly not. So the ship of Theseus is when does it stop being the car? Well, the mereological nihilist gets around all of it, says, well, there wasn't a car to begin with. Done. And it's a strong argument for mereological nihilism. It really is. It just eliminates that problem right off the bat. There was never a car to begin with. But if you seek some kind of middle ground, right, something between theism and the rejection of theism, well, relax, because the atheism is your middle ground. No, it's not. No philosopher agrees with you on this. Atheism is not the middle ground. Agnosticism is that middle ground between theism and atheism. It is a middle ground between believing the proposition false and believing proposition true. Atheism implies everything that rational doubter means when he declares himself agnostic. No, it's not. Why are you speaking for me, man? Why? I'm an agnostic. I'm telling you, you're fundamentally wrong. Any expert you ask on this that knows philosophy will tell you you're fundamentally wrong. But he says, I asked the experts. No, you didn't. You asked people that agreed with you. It's called confirmation bias. You're doing exactly what you tell theists not to do. You're suffering from the same confirmation bias you've had for a decade now. 2 decades, well, whatever, a decade and a half. A decade and a half. This is what I'm saying. Atheists can be just as religious as theists. This is religiosity in action. It's confirmation bias. And it's wrong. For a while, it's a common misconception that atheism implies a denial, rejection, or active disbelief in the very possibility of a God. This is not so. Well, yes, it is. You have the misconception, not them. Go to college and educate yourself. Because I guarantee it, no college teaches it that way. Alex O'Connor educated himself, went to college. Stephen Woodworth, aka Rationality Rules, went to college, educated himself. They now agree this is wrong. So why are you telling people what are misconceptions when you don't have the education to back it? When you don't have the citations to back it? This is indoctrination. This is literally doing what I criticize theists to do by indoctrination. Putting out misinformation to support a belief. The rest of us doubters simply don't hold the belief. We're all atheists, whether we are doubters or outright rejectors of theism. No, we're not. Stop labeling me. This is why I had it into, I got it in it with Brian a little bit. Well, it wasn't much with Brian, but it was people in that group. Because this is what their mindset is. This is indoctrination. I am not an atheist because of the way I use these words, which are in accordance with 99% of academics. They find that to be wrong. Okay, fine. Have your little echo chamber. In your echo chamber, believe what you want to believe. But don't apply it to everybody else who's educated. You're dumbing people down. You're saying, hey, look, educated people, you're wrong. We know more than you. Who else does that? Oh, creationists. Who else does that? Flat earthers. When I say that new atheism trademark, which again I didn't come up with, are the same level as flat earthers and young earth creationism, I'm not being hyperbolic. Like straight up, I'm not being hyperbolic. They literally are. They are not rational. And again, it's disturbing because as a non-believer, it reflects very poorly on the non-believer. And then they say, so missing the middle ground that you are obviously looking for, rational tentativeness, is already included within the term atheism. No, it's not. No. Literally the middle ground is agnosticism. If you don't like that, then you're just tilting at windmills. Go write your paper. Go explain to the entire academic community that they're wrong. Go explain to Oppie that he's wrong. Go explain to Malpass that he's wrong. Go explain to Malik that he's wrong. Go explain to Burgess Jackson that he's wrong. Because you have no grounding to do so. None. Matter of fact, if you literally look at the Venn diagram that we came up with, which was me and Landon Kurt Knoll, he did most of the well, not most of, I guess, but he really helped with the legend. I did the Venn itself. It clearly shows a middle ground. Now, until somebody like Brian or any new atheist can show that logic to be wrong, they have no argument. They're just making assertions, blind assertions, just like a theist would. Super chat, Kawasa 5001, but they don't have any beliefs. So Steve, so they can't hold any wrong beliefs to be fanatical. Yeah, there are some people, atheists that say that they don't have beliefs. I know God doesn't exist, but I don't believe it. I'm like, do you know how irrational you sound when you say I know there are no gods, but I don't believe it? That is literally what Moore's paradox is. That is literally what's called a peculiar reasoner in didactic logic. So, Kawasa, yeah, no, a lot of them say they don't have beliefs, but even the most ardent atheist out there, atheist activists, true TMs, the new atheist TMs, they denounce that nonsense. They all recognize that beliefs are epistemic depositions, and that without beliefs you can't have knowledge. The educated ones do. But here's my Venn diagram. Right there on the union between the two circles, that position, that conjunction of non-belief of the proposition and non-belief of the negation of the proposition, that middle ground exists. That is agnosticism. If you don't like it, well, who cares about your feelings? I'm more cynical than I've ever been, and I'm probably a little harder, more edgy than I've ever been, because I'm so sick of dishonest atheists. So sick of people that are trying to tell people misinformation, and they don't have the education, they don't have the certifications, they don't have the experience, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have anything, they don't have the logic. I may not be formally educated. Yeah, I took informal fallacies in college, and I've had some training in logic or basic logic as far as like Boolean, but I've read quite a bit on this basic stuff, and I at least have a logical argument to be had. I have a Venn diagram that I created with an actual mathematician. You can't just hand that away. Show me, new atheists, how this is wrong. The most they can come up with is saying, oh, well, in P you say exists, and not P you say exists, but it should be exists. No, that's not necessarily the case. If you go look in grammar, the way I've worded it is fine. It's the plural form of the I believe the I don't remember the technical name for it, but it doesn't really matter. I have P this, I have not P. I wanted to use the same terminology, so there's no ambiguity there. But as far as the logic, show me that's wrong. Show me that middle ground does not exist using that schema. What are you going to deny? What premise do you deny? What assumption do you deny? Nobody would come on and tell me otherwise. Nobody. They don't have the balls to. Because if you accept weak atheism as atheism, then you have to accept weak theism as theism if somebody says that's theism. You have no justification not to. None. So, yeah, it's maddening. It's maddening, these people. Because they're supposed to be the agents of rationality. Oh, but I've watched the Atheist Experience. Matt Dillahunty says this. Shut up. It's like, I've actually people have recently like call in and talk to Matt Dillahunty. He'll set you straight. Oh, give me a freaking break. Even Matt won't touch this. And Matt, we already know that Matt, decided to, believe, Kyle Curtis and decided to, shit all over a victim of rape. Supposedly, he was, according to Ben, he was raped. And shit on all of him, telling him he was a drunk ex. So I have no respect for Matt after that. None. He never apologized to Matt, or to Ben for that. And I'm going to the day I die, Matt Dillahunty owes Ben an apology for calling him a scorned ex drunk boyfriend. When he was telling the truth all along. That to me is vile. That's just me. I have a hard time getting over that. But yeah, they want me to call in and talk to Matt. Yeah, okay. Talk. I'll tell you what, when Matt can show that Venn diagram is wrong, get back to me, okay? All right, moving on. So what does the word agnostic actually mean and how ought we use it? Oh, I love it. Now he's trying to be ought. Now he's trying to use a prescription, right? Ought. Notice the A in front. Agnosticism is a position counter to Gnosticism. Show me this. There is nowhere in any academic literature I found that supports this accusation. Nothing. Matter of fact, Wiki, if you go look at Gnosticism, tells you not to conflate it with agnosticism, not to be confused with agnosticism. Agnosticism and Gnosticism are absolutely unrelated. Gnosticism was a form of belief by a Jewish sect that basically believed that you could become one with the divine by having hidden knowledge, divine knowledge. Agnosticism is predicated on the word gnos, G-O-N-S, which Thomas Henry Huxley used as a neologism at the time to mean the illusion of having knowledge. He felt the theist and atheist, both of them, had no claim to say God does not exist, whether as knowledge or a doxastic status for belief. So he coined the term agnosticism to mean the illusion of having knowledge, but more of a way of a scientific method to say that epistemologically, we should not believe something unless we have good reasons to do so. It was a method that he coined the term. They're absolutely, unequivocally unrelated, and there's no etymological root. Phylogeny. There's no etymological roots between them besides that nos, but it wasn't derived naturally. It wasn't from usage. It was a neologism. So when he says Gnosticism is a position counter agnosticism, citation, please. Let me tell you guys out there, I have asked atheists for citations on this from day one. Just show me where this is the case. Just show me where you can have things like agnostic atheist or agnostic theist in a system that is not nonsensical, that is unambiguous, that is non-superfluous. Show me a multi-actual system where you have belief on the Y and knowledge on the X, or vice versa, sorry, that works. I cannot find a logical schema that works. I think I've shown that it doesn't work, but look, when I wrote the logical ambiguity of Gnostic atheism, I might be wrong on that. I could be. But I've at least shown that it's not as easy as what people think it is. And if you want to come up with a schema that proves me wrong on that, go for it. That is not a logical... My argument on logical ambiguity is not a logical proof. it's a logical argument, but it's not a logical proof. I don't claim it as a logical proof. But I show unequivocally, I think that is ambiguous, and there's no way to disambiguate that. But I'm willing to accept I might be wrong on that. And I would love an atheist to come up with a disambiguous schema for those types of terminology using agnostic atheism. I have yet to have anybody even try of any consequence. Maybe one or two people I think have minorly tried, but they've always failed. Relatively quickly, by the way. But do you notice that? Do you guys notice in here? There's no citations for any of this in here. There's no citations. Nothing. Interesting, right? There's just no citations in this. It's just whatever they say. This is what's called an echo chamber. It is the belief that a human being can possess knowledge about a god. Well, no, it's not. That's only an epistemological question. We're not talking about the proposition that God's knowable. We're talking about the proposition, does God exist? He switched from the the ontological domain to the epistemological domain. And that is dishonest. It is an epistemological term about the possibility of knowledge in regards to God's claim and not a statement about matters of belief. No, that's absolutely wrong. Why is it that every expert disagrees with him? And I'm talking about philosophical experts, not R and Raw. I mean, if Graham Oppy, who writes the materials for college, says in his companion to atheism, agnosticism is the belief that one is not just, one suspends judgment. And suspending judgment means to not believe P and not believe not P. Then he's telling you this is how it's normally used in the curriculum there, in that college. If you want to pass the course, you ought to use it that way. Here's a guy saying, hey, look, no, don't, that's not what it means. If you were to listen to Brian and try to pass these courses, you would fail. What good is that? Because you fundamentally lack the understanding. So let's see here. Agnostics hold to the epistemological position that a human being can't actually know anything about something but nature, but instead theists call supernatural. Citation? Where did that come from? I'm an agnostic. I don't hold that position. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. That's called skepticism, Brian. Skeptics hold that human beings can't actually know anything. Some have modifications and that say, well, you can know a priori knowledge. I can know that I exist. I can know that A equals A. But as far as having knowledge of anything else, knowledge is unobtainable. That's not agnosticism. Some very famous theologians have agreed that man is limited and that this means that man cannot have, quote, God knowledge. The list of theologians would include people like Martin Luther or Soren Kierkegaard. So when one says that they are agnostic and they mean a doubter, they are really saying that they're agnostic atheists. No, they're not. Citation, please. You literally pull that out your ass. Literally, I challenge you. You know, Brian had this challenge for the blasphemy challenge. I challenge Brian to find anywhere in any academic paper where the hell any of this makes any sense. There isn't any. I can tell you right now. Well, I can't say categorical because again, I've read every paper out there, and that's a reasonable argument to be made. Steve, well, you didn't read every paper out there. You don't know all the papers. Okay, fair enough. But I will qualify it as every paper I've ever read. None of this is even in there. I've never found a paper where this exists. Not one. So don't you think that since 2006, this is 2022, if one atheist had a paper that talked about this in a reasonable manner, they would have produced it by now? Now, people can say, well, Draper mentions it. Yeah, but he mentions it almost scoffingly. And there's one other paper that I read that talks about it, but it was a college paper from, it was just a college paper that somebody wrote for their coursework. It wasn't anything more than that. And it was very poorly done. But you can in certain open journals, you can publish anything, right? So just because something's out there that it's on, Academia EDU or whatever it is that I get papers from all the time, just because it's on there doesn't mean it's peer reviewed. You have to go actually look to see if it's peer reviewed. I found a paper written from one of my ex-roommates, Paul Price, on UFOs and electromagnetism, that all he did was basically copy Wikipedia and had this nonsense stuff. I knew the guy personally. I lived with the guy. He had no idea what the hell he was talking about. He didn't know shit about physics. He has a paper that I got recommended by Academia EDU, whatever that site is that most of us subscribe to. It wasn't peer reviewed. Now, but anybody who read that would go, oh, here's a paper on electromagnetism and anti-gravity. It's a bunch of crap is what it was. He had not shown anti-gravity. The guy was an idiot. So you got to be real careful. If you don't believe me, go look it up. Paul Price. Go find a paper on Paul Price and anti-gravity. I've shown it before. And yes, that came in my email as a recommendation. So they believe that there's no way for a human being to know anything about God, but there are many theists who agree. Okay, so what? Why do I care about the knowledge of God existing or not? Again, we're talking about beliefs. Most atheists say, look, I believe God exists. I don't know it, but I believe it. That's what we want to talk about. Now, they can go further and say, yeah, I know God exists, but you know what? All that does is just raise the bar for them. Fine. But I still want to know why they believe it before we even get to the knowledge quote claim. If you say you know God exists and you can't tell me what theory of knowledge you're using to get there, I don't think you have a claim to knowledge. I will automatically discount your claim to knowledge. But you say, I believe God exists, and I say, what's your justifications? Oh, okay. Well, this, and this. Okay, I'll be like, okay, look, I think you have a justification for your belief. Doesn't mean I have to accept your belief, but I think that you have a reasonable articulation and justification for why you hold that particular belief. I don't hold belief God is irrational. Now, some philosophers do, some people do. I don't, because it's coherent, right? If I said that I'm a theist, I believe God exists, and that God can create square circles, then I'm going to hold your position as irrational, right? Because that particular God cannot exist. Theists can be agnostics. No, they can't be. Stop it. We've already established that the way you're using these terms are atypical. Kawasa 2001. People like Mr. ID or Ken Hovind or Anthony Riley actually wrote dissertations, so they are actual better than lactheists. Yeah, they tried, right? We will be doing Mr. ID's paper coming up. And I doubt Kent will ever come back on my channel, but we are in negotiations with one of his ex-wives to come on a secular show. In fact, many theists say that they hold their God belief on faith. They're called theist because they agree that we humans cannot know things about the supernatural. That's not their justification. That would be a poor justification. Knowledge is a subset of belief on any belief first theory, like justified true belief. There are other theories out there, but the most common is justified true belief. So you can't say, well, I hold the belief on faith because I can't know it. No, that's a bad belief. That's a bad justification. Just because you can't know something does not mean you shouldn't believe it. I can't know external minds exist because it's axiomatic. That's an assumption. But I believe it. I can't know certain axioms, right? The reality is real as an axiom. That there is something external to the mind is an axiom. I can't know that. Why? Because that's the axiom by which I use to build knowledge. You cannot know properly basic beliefs. You can't justify them. So if you can't justify them, how are they justified true beliefs? So people make that mistake that they say, well, I believe God exists on faith because I can't know it. That's a bad justification. And I don't know many theists that would do that. Some very famous theologians have agreed that man is limited and that this means that man cannot have God knowledge. Okay, so what? That's not a justification for their belief. That's not just on faith. They have reasons why they believe God exists. I think this is a straw man, actually. But the list of theologians would include people like Martin Luther, Soren Kierkegaard, who when one says that they are agnostic, they mean a doubter. What they're really saying, they're agnostic atheists, so we find that what describes your own agnosticism. Welcome to atheism. Yeah, that's just nonsense. What is atheist? From Jake, founder of the Atheist Network. Who gives a shit what Jake says? He's telling you what an atheist is from what? What scholarly paper is he using? What academic citation? No, he's just saying this is what I believe it is. This is indoctrination. I'm not even play the video. I haven't even listened to the video. I don't care. Frequently asked questions. I don't disbelieve in God. I just don't believe. Again, if you literally don't disbelieve, then it would follow that you believe. No, it doesn't. If you don't accept the proposition as false, it does not mean you accept the proposition as true. It just means you don't believe. And here he's going, well, here, atheist, you believe there's no gods. well, yeah, but you're trying to tell me that atheism is not necessarily the belief that God does not exist, but the lack of belief. You've said atheism is one thing. God, the lack of belief God exists, because I know, not in this particular thing, but he said it, they've talked about it before, because that's what the American atheist believes. The American atheist says God is one thing, a lack of belief. He's argued that in here somewhere, that lack of belief is what atheism is. So now he's saying, well, no, now you believe. You obviously don't mean to say this. What you mean probably to say is that you don't believe or reject the possibility of God claims. Rejection means to believe false. This leaves you without any theistic beliefs. Yes, and also leaves you without atheistic beliefs as well. There's two sides of the proposition, Brian. Believes God exists, right? There's the proposition God exists and the proposition God does not exist. Those are the same proposition. One says negation of the other. All propositions are positive. Anytime you say God exists, you have God does not exist. If anything you says the proposition God does not exist, then the negation is God exists. They're the same proposition. One's just a negation of it. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say the same proposition, obviously, because they're negation, but you know what I mean by that. There are atheist beliefs. You don't mean, if you're without atheist beliefs, you're without the belief that God does not exist. Does that make you a theist? Well, I don't think so, but one could argue that using the same rationality. Fenn says, I'm hoping Steve will branch out into new things. It'll be a better use of his wit. I have 3 channels. I'm doing the non sequitur show. We talk about all kinds of stuff. I just use this as one of my pet peeves in this channel. And so once a week, I kind of talk about this stuff because I have to keep reiterating to people. But I appreciate it, man. And I do reviews on other things as well. You guys saw my, even though it's similar to this, but you guys saw my review of Aaron Ron's talk with those Muslims. That got a lot of watch. And even atheists were like, yeah, you're right, Steve. Aaron did a pretty crappy job. Theologians were like, hey, this is pretty good too. So, what I really wanted somebody to engage with, I don't find too many atheists are willing to engage with any longer. Why? Because I don't think they have an argument and they know it. They just make assertions. Unless you are a pantheist or polytheist, a person with God beliefs other than theism, this makes you an atheist. No, it doesn't. We've already established that's not what atheism means. The atheist. That's not what the A in atheist is understood as. This is semantics. A in atheism is not without. It is understood as not. You're changing it. You're wanting it to be something else. You're just by fiat saying, this is what it means etymologically. That's called the etymological fallacy. You're literally committing a fallacy. Atheism does not necessarily imply anything other than lack of theistic belief. Okay, but we're talking about necessarily, then the theist can argue, theism does not necessarily impart anything than a lack of atheist belief. It's called mirroring. If one does not sound right to you, then the other shouldn't. That's critical thinking. That's using reason. That's rationalism. If one does not make sense to you, then the other shouldn't either. Or you have to accept both. That's a reasoned argument. If it makes sense to you to say atheism does not necessarily imply anything other than a lack of theistic belief, then it has to make sense. Theism does not necessarily imply anything other than a lack of atheist belief. It has to. So, now, again, there's something to be said here. I'm going to give a little principle of charity. There's actually something to be said here because I'm sure somebody's going to call me out on it if my viewers are on point. When you say you're an atheist, by necessity, it means you lack a belief God exists. Okay, but the same token, if you're a theist, by necessity, it means that you lack a belief God does not exist. Right. So I should say, I mean, you know what? I'm gonna walk it back a little bit. I actually accept both. In that, if we're talking about necessity of implying by implication that atheism necessary by implication implies you lack a belief God exists. But at the same token, theism by necessity implies you lack a belief that God exists. Does not exist. But here's the caveat. Lack of belief is not a necessary, lack of belief is not a sufficient condition. It's a necessary condition, but not sufficient. So this is actually, sure, I'll go with this. This is actually right. But it's not sufficient. If you lack a belief God exists, it's not sufficient to say you're an atheist. Just like if you lack a belief God does not exist, it's not sufficient to say you're a theist. So yes, atheism necessarily implies you lack a belief God exists. Theism necessarily implies you lack a belief God does not exist. So you guys see that? So these are necessary but not sufficient conditions. The other options, if you don't believe and you don't believe, are you're dead. Okay, you have no beliefs either way. But if you have no beliefs either way, it does not necessarily make you an atheist either, because you haven't suspended judgment. You're dead. But anyways, I mean, there's more to this, but I think I've gone long enough and I'm tired. I might do a part 2, because it gets into but my dictionary says that atheism is defined as. I will get to this. Will it surprise you to find out the dictionaries exist to provide definitions that people might use? Yeah, that's the whole point, Brian. That they used. You're trying to argue it prescriptively. You're talking out both sides of your mouth in this. You're saying, yes, dictionaries are showing usages, but by dictionaries, it must mean this. By definition, you're an atheist, is what you're arguing. Right, but I'm getting tired. I'm going to do a part 2 later, I guess. So I'm going to wrap it up, guys. I got to go eat. That coffee's wearing off me and I'm hungry. Any quick questions before I wrap it up, before I go? Because again, I'm feeling kind of out of it right now. Yeah, I got to go eat. I think my blood sugar's low. All right, but if you've got questions, leave them in the video descriptions. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you later. Bye.